I'm going to, in the spirit of Joe Pearson, I'm going to channel my inner Joe Pearson, and I'm going to sit on a stool today. Scott was already grabbing it. He's like, nope, I know where this is going. Hey, real quick, and there will be a sermon, but real quick, I want to point something out about that song. You guys can finish this line. It says, I'll stand with arms high, heart abandoned, for the one who gave it all. There's two ways to look at that, and I want to make sure that we understand what we're singing. The first would say that he gave it all, like he gave everything he had. That is one way. But the other interpretation would be that he gave all that was required. Now, if you think about this, if God is fully sustained, God is fully himself, God doesn't need anything to be God. He doesn't need you to submit to him so that he somehow feels more godly. If he gave all that was required, he gave all of himself on behalf of you. So then here's the line that I think, and if you're new to church, I love this. I love when people come in to a church, and if you're new here, please come back. How's that? I love preaching to people who don't know the Bible. I love preaching to people who almost think of themselves as being not quite church people. It's been that way my whole life. And so I'm always aware when the song says, give my heart completely to you. Don't you suppose that there would be people who are like, seems a little steep. What if I just sort of took a casual view for a while? God's not asking for all of us completely as a rule. And it's not like everybody else sitting in the church is like, I did it, did you? Because of the first point, it says he gave all that was required. We can be all of ourselves because of it. And that the more we get to know God, the more we discover that we really are our best self, the more that God has control of our heart. We don't reserve for ourselves to sustain. We don't reserve parts of our heart for ourselves so that we can sort of stay balanced. It says that we reserve parts of our heart, and that is the part that is not redeemed. And this is a whole different sermon, but what God is saying is because of what I did, you can be something you couldn't have been otherwise. Okay, anyway, that was free. The rest of this is going to cost you 10%. Ha ha ha. I know you people. You're like, no, it won't. No, I'm kidding. If you guys that follow me on social media, you might have seen it this week. I don't know what happened to me. Give me 2 weeks off. I go to Vegas for a week, and look what happens. We went pheasant hunting this week. I took Jet pheasant hunting. My father-in-law told me one time, he said, being a parent is easy. You just figure out what your kids like to do, and you do that a lot. And I'm like, well, if that's true, I can at least do that. So we went pheasant hunting, because if you guys don't know, my little boy is just a nut about hunting, and right now birds are kind of his thing, and so we went pheasant hunting. So I flew in the night before. We had this plan to go the next morning. We were going. I don't care what happened. I don't care if we had to walk to Madras. There's a place up there that we go. But the night before it was raining. You guys might have been here. This would have been Tuesday night. Raining pretty hard. And then what happens when it's done raining is it freezes. Now, if you're one of those people who get all judgy about the people in the South, like, oh, the people in the South, they can't drive, blah, 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 blah. First of all, you're right. But what people don't understand is that in the South, we don't get snow very often, almost never. What we get is freezing rain. And people who live in the South will understand what I'm saying is that freezing rain is not the same as snow. Much different. I remember the first time I was actually a passenger in a vehicle driving on actual packed snow, and we were going like 55 miles an hour, and I knew we were dead. We're dead. I don't know what this guy's doing. It's over, because where I'm from, that's like, you're done. So the next morning we wake up and we start to drive to Madras, and if you guys have been around, you got rain the night before, it freezes, so on the road you're going to have ice. And what is the most dangerous road condition that there is? Black ice. Black ice. Specifically because of its invisibility. Specifically because you can be rocking along. I didn't wreck. If you guys think this is building up, like, I'm good, I made it. Because like any good Texan, I know that you can't wreck if you have your four-wheel drive on. So we're driving, and It's the invisibility. You can be rocking along thinking everything is fine, and you won't know that there's black ice until there's a problem. Exactly. Now, what would have happened, because we started a couple weeks ago looking at the difference between a rule book and a playbook. If you look at the NFL, which I do, some of you giggling, we're on a 5-game winning streak. You're going to get to listen to me preach in a Tony Romo jersey here in about 2 months. Anyway, not important. I'm sure there's a church for you somewhere. This is falling completely off the rails. Okay, so bear with me. Rule book, playbook. Every team in the NFL gets a rule book. They all get one. But the intimate nature does not come from the rule book, because even people in the stands can get the rule book of football. Specifically, it's the playbook that says when you get the playbook, you're on a team, you're included, you're a part of something, you've been brought in, it's personal. Do you see the difference between a rule book that is very general and the playbook? And the playbook has to operate within the rule book. Because you can't write up a play that says we're going to run backwards and score 17 points, right? Well, the rule book doesn't allow that. So it has to be both. And so what Jesus did when he came is he said, I didn't come to do away with the rule book. What I came to do is give you an opportunity to live under the playbook. You guys with me? And that's an interesting concept if we can understand it, but it's a hard one. So say I get up and I go hunting with Jet, and there's black ice on the road, and I say, listen, the sign says I can go 55. That's the rules. You're all ahead of me. Had I driven to Madras under the law, I would have been in tremendous amount of danger. Why? Because this was not a rule book situation, this was a playbook situation, because the circumstances dictated that there were things that had to be done. Now listen, I had to drive within the rule book, but I also had to drive within the playbook because there was black ice. Isn't that a good concept? Like, I was like, that, I understand it better. And then I got all excited to preach. Here's what I do know. The biggest spiritual catastrophes, and if you've known people that have gone through just what seems like this huge meltdown. Have you ever known somebody? Don't point to anyone in the room, but I mean, like, have you ever known somebody they're like, oh, that's a good Christian. That is a good, oh, he's on drugs and cheating on his wife. Sweet. Out of just nowhere, they do something that just doesn't fit. See what I mean? So many times, these giant spiritual catastrophes are the result of someone who was following the rule book and looks up and says this, what happened? You ever heard this? I don't know what happened. I was doing so good. Anybody ever known anybody in any sort of recovery from an addiction? Things fall apart and I go, I was doing so good. It's because as people, we want to believe that the rule book can bring us a life that it cannot. We have got to get beyond the rule book. We've got to get into the playbook and go, Jesus, but specifically me. I get that there's rules, but specifically me. Like, I've got specific circumstances. I've lost people that are close to me. I've gone through hard times. I'm in the middle of a hard time now. The rule book is not what I need. I don't need to know that I'm allowed to go 55 because I got some black ice going on in my life. I need to know, where am I today specifically in regards to who you are in my life? Anybody ever been there? Has anybody ever been there where you're struggling in life and somebody just hands you the Bible and they're like, well, the rules say, and you're like, okay. And this is not to say, it's like Paul said, it's not to call the rule book bad. It's to say, I don't think it's enough. Moses can get you out of Egypt. The rules can get you out of bad habits, but it can't get you into the promised land. So let me ask you something. If there was spiritual black ice going on in your life, here's why it's dangerous. You won't know it until what? It's already a problem. Exactly. Wouldn't you want to know? Can you imagine the difficulty that I am facing right now as the speaker this morning saying, listen, you might have a problem, and if you do have it, you definitely won't know that you have it. Yeah, okay. Spiritual problems that cause the biggest issues are generally the ones we don't think we have. You'll listen and go, oh, that would be good for me. Wouldn't you want to know? See, if we're driving and there's black ice, you slow down. But spiritually, what do you take home with you today? When you leave here, what do you take home to address areas of spiritual black ice, areas that will cause you problems and you don't even see them coming? Wouldn't you want to leave this morning feeling more prepared to deal with issues that you might not even know you have? It's going to be a long morning. Okay. I'm going to read you about 14 verses, okay? It's like story time from the Bible. Luke chapter 7, verse 36. It says, when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. I'm just going to read it, and then we'll go back over it. The preacher in me wants to dive right in, but I'm going to read it. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on him. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she's a sinner. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. Verse 41. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love more? This is verse 43. Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. He turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, yet she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Verse 48, we got 3 more. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. It's a beautiful story just at a surface level. I said a couple weeks ago that if we're not careful, what happens is we begin to dance the Christian dance, so to speak, because we expect that we'll get something back. We expect that if we dance the right dance and we say the right things and we behave in a certain way and we sit in the right seats and we sing the right songs, that God somehow owes us something, and it becomes transactional. That there's no love in that at all, that it's instead transactional. And here's what's interesting to me, and I realize this is a family show. It was almost, and we're going to learn why. We've got 4 sermons in the next 2 weeks. I would encourage you to try to be here for all of them. It was almost like Jesus had a soft spot for the worst people. It was almost like Jesus had a soft spot for the people who were the most sort of just oppressed or looked down on or cast out. It doesn't tell me that Jesus had a problem with the rule breakers as much as he had a problem with the people who thought they didn't break rules. Like, if you're wondering who Jesus is, if we're going back to the beginning of what I said, like if you're new to church or if you're listening and you're not a church person and you're trying to kind of just get a view of Jesus, know this. Jesus always seemed to run up against people who thought they were the best people. It's interesting to me. It was like Jesus looked forward to awkward encounters. It was like he loved them. My wife loves awkward encounters. Loves them. Loves them. Loves them. In a way I can't even express. She's got, if you know Lacey, she's like a no pretense person. So when someone behaves with zero pretense to the awkwardness of those around them, Lacey's like, jackpot. In a loving way that only she can do, but I think her and Jesus share that. Let's break this down. Let's see what's actually there, because at a surface level, it's good, but if you go below the surface, it gets even better. Luke chapter 7, verse 36. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. Now, isn't that interesting? Because remember, the Pharisees and Jesus sort of had this thing going. And they weren't in support of Jesus. But here this Pharisee invites Jesus to dinner at his house. Now, what we know, if you look through the whole Bible, there was varying degrees of disapproval. There were some that were like, kill him, which I would rate that as like high. And then there were others who were just maybe like people who haven't really made a commitment to Jesus, but they're curious to what's there. And I would say that Simon, by inviting Jesus to his house, it wasn't all out approval for Jesus, but what we're going to see is that Simon said, come eat at my house. What is this? I want to observe. I want to see what this is all about. It says basically in the description, he was withholding judgment until he'd seen it himself. Sounds like us, actually. A lot of people I know are sort of that way. They're like, I'm not going to get caught up in the hype. We're not hype people. We want to see it for ourselves. And that's kind of what Simon was doing. It says he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. remember, if there's a detail, it matters. This is what's interesting. Simon was not holding the culture of the Jewish people. When he went to the house and reclined at the table, that was not a Jewish custom. That was actually a Persian or Greek or Roman custom. So you've got Simon is an interesting character to me in this because he's not sold out to the Jewish ways. He doesn't seem to be sold out to the Pharisees. He seems to be one of those people who just kind of wants to do things his way. If you'll remember, Nicodemus came to Jesus in the middle of the night. Nicodemus, also a Pharisee. And it doesn't say that he came like, Jesus, I want you to know I'm all in. He left that way, but it says when he got there, he was like, don't tell anybody I was here. So, as a Pharisee, he would have been elevated. He would have worn nice clothes. He was wealthy. He was a homeowner. He was a man. He was this. He had a reputation to uphold. You know people like this. They're always looking at other people to make sure that they're staying a couple steps ahead. They're always looking to gauge and make sure that they're doing okay. And I don't disrespect that. I understand that there are people who want to do the right thing, but it can lead to a lot of junk. It can lead to a lot of garbage. But he's got this image. Let's say that at very least, Simon he's a Renaissance man. He's got other culture stuff going on in his house, and he's inviting this guy over that everybody's against. He's this open-minded, probably forward-thinking kind of guy. And in walks who? To his house. Now, just a second. I know we're reading this in the Bible, and so we have a way to sort of distance ourselves from it. Imagine you're at your own house. I'll wait for 2 seconds. You're at your own house. Ready? Okay. And you have this esteemed guest, and he's eating at your table, and you're sort of just feeling, let's say maybe, like what the world is telling you is a presidential candidate. Now, listen, Jesus had no plans on becoming that, but for all Simon knew, that was the end game for Jesus. This could be the guy. And so he's just inspecting. It says, a woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. Listen, as someone who was in an occupational, transactional lifestyle, what she's holding is a means to her income. Everybody talks about how valuable it was, but it wasn't valuable for what it was worth. It was valuable for what she did for work. She is holding her living in her hands. And then she does the absolute unthinkable. She walked into the Pharisee's house. Listen, visualize it. You're sitting there, you're sort of with this guy, and you're like making sure everybody's, the plates are just right. You guys have all had people over your house. You want everything to be right. And in walks this lady. Don't you know, that Simon was like, she's not, I don't know her. Now, if you can visualize it, for some of you guys who have a good imagination, you can visualize the sort of, like the tension might have been like here, until she walked in. And then the tension would have been like, as she stood behind him, weeping at his feet, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. A couple of things to remember is that at a human level, this lady represented the opposite of Simon. Jesus was sitting there looking at what people would say was two opposite ends of the spectrum in the same room. They're completely different. And now Simon, remember, he's trying to decide who Jesus is, so he's just sort of observing this, and all of a sudden you've got her. She was a woman. I probably fall a little towards the left, a little, in this thought. Jesus always esteemed women more than society said that he should have. And I'm not trying to make this a political thing, and I'm not even going to go too far down that road, but do you know the first person Jesus revealed the resurrection through? Women. So this idea that somehow women, the Bible tells you that you're less than or subpar, that you sit beside, you have a role to play in the world that is valuable. And if you listen to what Jesus did and how Jesus interacted, he did not make this lady less than. She shouldn't have been talking to him. Because of what she did for a living and because of who she was in society, she shouldn't have been talking to him. But she didn't stop there. She's ignoring every cue. Where's Jesus? Simon's house. I'm going. She didn't stop there. She begins to put her hands on Jesus. Now, this is something unclean touching this man who claims to be a prophet. And don't you know that Simon is going, first of all, she's not with me. We're clear. She just wasn't coming by. I'm just thinking all the weird things that come to your mind when you got somebody who could damage your reputation, because we're church people. We love our reputation. But then don't you think that if Simon's there to inspect this guy, and he's not calling him the Messiah, he's just taking it all in. It says, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is and that she's a sinner. Good old Simon being a good old Pharisee, because that's what Pharisees would say. Don't you think that this would have maybe confirmed his suspicion that this is all hype? Because remember, Simon's this open-minded guy. He's considering both sides. And in his mind, what he's seeing is proof that maybe this isn't, he's looking at this woman. He's not looking at Jesus, might I point out. He is not looking at Jesus. He is looking at the woman, and he is making his decisions. Oh my gosh, you guys, you ready for this one? He was making his decisions about Jesus, not based on Jesus, based on who was at his feet. Well, he can't be that great. Look at the church. Look at the people. I thought that guy was supposed to be good. I thought that guy was supposed to be. We all fall into it. It's a trap that we could all fall into. But Simon was making a determination about Jesus based on who was following him. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. He said, tell me, teacher. He says, 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. We read this. The concept is, who's going to love more? Now, I love this. I love this because the bottom falls out of this in our theological philosophy. Yeah, I said it. It says, therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. So he's acknowledging that she has been forgiven of a lot. Jesus didn't go, oh, it wasn't that bad. Because isn't that what we want to do when we give grace to someone? Oh, you didn't mean to. That's not grace. That's just, I don't know what that is. He says, which would have probably been a little embarrassing for her. He's like, oh, tons of sin. And Simon's like, yeah, I know. I live here. But then he says something, and this is where the philosophy, and we don't even have time to start down this road, but he says this, but whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Now, is Jesus suggesting that Simon had only been forgiven of a little bit of sin? Because I've always maybe thought that he was saying the woman was forgiven of a lot, but Simon was only forgiven. He doesn't say that. He's teaching him a concept that says, Simon, we gotta unpack this a little bit. It's a pet peeve of mine when someone is, how do I say this without sounding like a jerk? And I might not work anyway. Have you ever had somebody explaining something to you and they think they're ahead of you, but they're behind you? They're like, listen, dummy, it's this. And you're like, I know that, but it's also this. The pet peeve moment of like the arrogance of thinking you're ahead of me when actually you're behind me on something, right? And then there's nothing worse than thinking you're ahead of somebody and then they're ahead, it's just a thing. Simon took the position of like, well, now I feel confident. This guy couldn't be a prophet. And Jesus is just laying it out. He says, if you've only been forgiven of a little bit, you're only going to love a little bit. What he is saying is this, based on your own measurement, based on your own assumption, because remember, Simon was a rule book person. The Pharisees were rule book people. The rule says we can go 55, and we're going 55 because that's the rules, and we're following the rules. And Jesus is saying, you don't even see the danger that you're in. Because of the rules and because of the faith that you've placed into the rules, because of the way that you're clinging to the rule book, you don't even see the danger that you're in. Because you think you've only been forgiven of a little, you are loving little, and that changes everything. That changes everything in this whole story. I had to Google something this week, and I'm not proud of it, but I'm going to tell you because, like I said, if I ever get accused of saying something inappropriate, probably guilty, okay? I had to Google, is hoochie mama a bad word? And here's what Google said. It's not a swear word. It's just not a nice word. I'm like, I can live with that. Curious? Here's what Jesus is saying in terms that we can understand. The way that you behave is transactional, Simon. You're following the law. You're following the rules. I do so that I can get. I do so that I can get. And there's no love in the transaction. He's saying you are acting in the same manner as someone that you're referring to as less than. See, remember I said they walked in on different ends of the spectrum, but Jesus goes, no. You're the same. Your lifestyle and her lifestyle are almost identical. Can you imagine what an insult that would be to somebody who thought they were following the rules? He says you are transactional in your behavior. You're acting like just as big a hoochie mama as she is. There's the word. Is it a nice word? Probably not, but are we going to remember it now? Probably so. He said you've got so much confidence, and that is the biggest danger. You are rocking along, and you don't even see the black ice. And the black ice that will wreck your life, you won't even recognize until it's too late. And you go, well, then what does that look like? Then what is that? Well, first of all, let's look at what it looks like if we get it wrong. Let's pause for a second, because what happened was Simon says, I'm better than she is. And Jesus goes, you're pretty much the same. Except one thing. She sees it, you don't. What an insult. He was like, how dare you be in my house? And Jesus was like, she's right, you're wrong. The insults continue. You think you've been forgiven of a little, so you love a little. Doesn't that just sound like I'm not going to go too far down that road. Okay. What would have happened if the woman would have said, where's Jesus? I got to get to him. I got sins and I need forgiven. And they would go, he's at Simon's house. It's like, is he a Pharisee? Oh, I can't do that. I can't go to church. Those people know who I am. What kind of danger would that have created for a lady if she would have taken her focus off of Jesus and placed it on those around her? It would have been devastating. Are you guys following me? What she had to do was laser focus on Jesus to the point that she was willing to ignore everything else. Now, by comparison, have you ever said this? Have you ever thought this? I wish, don't judge me. Don't judge me. You're being judgmental. You realize the oxymoron in that, right? If I accuse you of being judgmental, it's coming slowly, but I see a couple of lights coming on. Don't judge me. I've made mistakes, but you're not perfect. Don't judge me. What you're saying is, don't judge me, or I'll judge you. It just doesn't work. It's not that either side is right or wrong. It's that when we allow our focus to shift from Jesus to those around us for any reason, we have become distracted from who Jesus is in the first place. That is the black ice. That is the black ice. When we are so aware of what's going on around us. Oh, it just got real, didn't it? You're like, oh no. We've become people. We've become people who compare. That's harder to say than you think. We're always looking around. We're always comparing. We're always looking at people. And when we look at other people, it either makes us feel better or worse. And the lady that finally got to a place where she goes, I've got to ignore everything and get to Jesus. Now, Simon, here's the problem that Simon had, is that he was looking around also. But his results led him to believe that he was okay. His results led him to believe the road is good, I can go, the rules say I can go, I'm going. And Jesus is saying that is the greatest danger, is that you don't even see it in your own life. Now think of this. Think of how insulting Jesus talking to someone who had been in an occupational lifestyle that was transactional, telling you, she's right, you're wrong. And you're actually very similar in your approach to life. Now that seems insulting unless you think of Jesus as saying, hey. There's black ice everywhere, man. The danger that you're in, you don't even see that you're in. And I think that's what I say that what we need out of this morning is this, is that we need to become aware that when we live in comparison, we are in danger of feeling less than or more than. Here's what's crazy. We set a trap for people and go, oh, we're better than that person. Oh, we're doing better than that person. I'd never say that. I'd never do that. Don't you think that he's doing a little too good? We set a trap for everybody else, and what Jesus is warning Simon of is you will fall into your own trap. Eventually, you'll mess up. Eventually, you'll make a mistake, and the grading system that you have developed now puts you in the less than category. Jesus is saying it's not because your judgment of everyone else hurts everyone else. Eventually, your judgment of everyone else will hurt you. That's an interesting take on that story. He says this. He says, Simon, you're dedicated to a rule book. She found the playbook. That's why I want to say that the one who gave it all, you have to see that through the proper scope that says he gave everything that was required. None of us have been forgiven of only a little bit. Our sin is not somehow special or less than those other people who have that other special sin that we all like to pick on, whatever that may be. The black ice is when we get so confident that we're doing it wrong or so discouraged that we can never get it right. When we allow our focus to shift to others, we will eventually forget that Jesus is in the room. We will become so aware of others and what they're doing that all of a sudden we have lost the entire grasp on who Jesus is. And Jesus is saying, I'm the playbook. I'm it. I'm the only thing that matters. What she is doing is demonstrating what you should have done when I walked in. Did you catch that? That was what Jesus was saying? He was saying her reaction is accurate. She sees it, you don't. What she did is what you should have done. But because of this rule book and your misinterpretation of it, you think I haven't done for you what I did for her, but in reality, I'm offering the same thing to you that I'm offering to even her. If we understood that, if we could walk out today and say, if we get it wrong, we're over-focused on each other. To get it wrong, the black ice of focusing on each other, we're going to feel good or we're going to feel bad. Both are wrong. Remember the sermon series about it's neither? Well, am I a good person or am I a bad person? Neither. Doesn't matter how good you act, it's still not good enough. No matter how bad you act, you're still not so far that Jesus can't redeem you. It's neither. The black ice is when we allow the standard and this measurement. It says, well, I'm doing this or I'm not doing that or I'm in church every week. How many times did I say that growing up? I go to church every week. And Jesus is going, me too. You can't do 55 today. You can't go 55 miles an hour today. You've got to slow down and look around and realize that I've done all of it for you. Do you think, let me ask you something, and can we just vision cast for a second? Can we just do this? I don't even know if this is going to make it into the sermon. This has been great. Thanks for coming. I don't know if this is going to make it or not. Why are we all not passionate? I want to be careful how I say this because I'm trying to condemn what we've done so far. But do you know there's people in Powell, Butte who don't know Jesus, who may not be able to do what this lady did, walking into Simon's house, reckless abandon, throwing themselves at Jesus' feet? And as long as they think of us as Simon, they can't do it. Until we take off the Simon hat and we accept what Jesus did for us, we cannot be a welcoming place for people who are lost if we think we've only been forgiven of a little. We can't love God accurately if we think he only forgave us for a little bit. We can't go all in on who God is if we think that it's transactional. We did our part and he's doing our part, and now we're getting what we want. If we ever get to a place where we view each other through the scope of Simon, we've hit black ice and our church is spinning even if we don't know it. I would love to think that this is the home of dirty people. This is the home of sinners. This is the home of people who can't even see daylight. This is the home of people even like Simon who walk in and go, I'm not in, I don't believe, I just want to observe. I don't think a church that gets that right could help but see lives be changed. When we take the focus off of ourselves, place it onto Jesus accurately through what the Word says and through what the Holy Spirit leads us to, I think we would be changed. We become aware of the black ice of putting focus on each other and judging, well, why are they this, why this, why that, why this, why would they? I don't know. I just remember the day I walked in weeping at Jesus' feet and said, what about me? Could you do something for me? I would love to think that I can be someone who feels like I've been forgiven of a lot. I've been forgiven of more. I've been forgiven of sin that I knew was sin as I was committing it. I was a preacher's kid who was raised with the rule book and ignored it for years and walked as far away from God as I thought I could go but still make heaven. We're laughing because, right, I did too. When I think of myself more as the lady laying on the ground weeping at Jesus' feet, he becomes more real to me. And it causes me to love people that are unlovable. I don't know why this has happened the way that it's happened, but it's like God has given me this new desire to see gross people come to Jesus. Gross people, whether it's gross because we think we're good or we're gross because we think we're bad, that this is a safe enough environment that you know when you walk in, you're going to hug people and you're going to love on people and you're going to tell them they're at their home and you're going to show them where the children's church is and they go, I can't help but come back. I don't even know Jesus yet, but I've met the people and wow. It would change the scope of how we do church. If we could just avoid the black ice of placing the focus on each other. Let's pray. God, what an interesting thought. I love your word. I love how your word says that two people who thought they were on the opposite ends of the spectrum, God, you were able to show them that they were actually the same. And the difference was one could see it and one couldn't. One was in danger of black ice and the other one was at least aware of the mistakes that they'd made. Lord, give us the heart of the lady washing your feet. Give us the attitude. Give us the spirit of someone who's been forgiven of a lot. God, allow this. I'm asking as the pastor of this church, with whatever power I wield as such, God, give us a heart that loves people at their very worst. God, give us an evangelistic spirit that when we walk out of this church, we are looking for opportunities to love people. It's not that hard to find people to love. It's just hard to find people that we want to love. God, bring people in our path. Let us bring people in. Let us make a difference. God, for the people watching online, for the campuses in Wickenburg and Adel, God, where there are people observing your word, even if it's just at a Simon level that says, I'm just taking it in. God, give us a new perspective of who you are so that we can have a better perspective of who we are. Pray in Jesus' name, amen.